Saudi Arabia and Iran are two very different countries, but they both have one important thing in common. The largest country they import from and export to is China. China's relationships with Iran and Saudi Arabia, respectively, however, is different. Let's start with Iran. Due to US and European sanctions, Iran relies heavily on the Chinese market, which takes in about 34% of all Iranian exports. Even more importantly, Chinese imports also account for about 30% of all Iranian imports. These imports are strategic for Iran because if China were to suddenly stop trading with Iran for any reason, Iran would have to find alternative suppliers. That could be difficult because of the sanctions and because not all countries export in the same volumes as China. Trade between China and Iran is important, but in absolute terms it is tiny compared to the trade between China and Saudi Arabia. The value of China-Iran trade is around $15 billion, while China-Saudi Arabia trade exceeds $100 billion. This is mainly because Saudi Arabia's main export is, of course, oil, and China, with a population of over a billion and cities full of cars, factories, trains, and infrastructure thirsty for energy and fuel, benefits greatly from Saudi oil. The reverse is true as well. Saudi Arabia, a desert country with few natural resources, imports many goods from China, including cars, steel, tech devices, and clothing. This gives China unique relationships with both Iran and Saudi Arabia that may have helped China mediate diplomatically between the two, leading to a recent reopening of diplomatic relations between them. China's role isn't just about trade either. China has major investments across the region. Chinese investments in the United Arab Emirates, for example, are worth about $42 billion. In Saudi Arabia, $59 billion. In Iraq, $34 billion. And in Egypt, $25 billion. In Egypt specifically, China has invested in the new administrative capital and in the development of the Suez Canal. This is in addition to investments in Egyptian industry and technology. These investments are not limited to Arab countries. China has significant commercial ties with the Israelis, especially in technology. These ties are important due to Israeli technological advances in recent years, which China could benefit from. Even the Chinese ambassador to the State of Israel wrote in the Jerusalem Post that Israeli-Chinese technological cooperation benefits all of humanity. Moreover, through access to Israeli technology, the Chinese might gain access to American technology. This is a serious concern for the US, especially if the Israelis transfer dual-use technologies that can be used for both civilian and military purposes. Given China's ties with US rivals such as Iran, Russia, and North Korea, it's not impossible that China might transfer such technology to these countries. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu acknowledged this when he wrote in his memoir, "I was totally frank about setting clear limitations on what types of technologies we would share with China, stopping when it came to the military and intelligence fields. Thanks to its economic role in the region, China is able to stay out of most international conflicts and engage with each country individually. This is part of its global competition with the United States. For now, this competition is mainly economic. China does not have a global military footprint like the United States, at least not now. In the Middle East, for example, the United States has formal alliances with Turkey, Egypt, the State of Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and also has important ties to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman. China, in contrast, has no military alliances in the region. Although China does sell arms to Middle Eastern countries, these arms sales are still not at the same level of Russian or American arms sales. But several developments could increase the importance of Chinese weapons in the coming years. First is the situation in Russia. Due to the war in Ukraine, two things could happen to Russia. First, the Russian economy could weaken, reducing its capacity to produce weapons. Or secondly, because of tensions with Europe and the war in Ukraine, Russia may need to use the arms it produces for its own defense. So far, this has not happened. In fact, data shows that Russia's arms production has increased since the war in Ukraine began. However, the same research also casts doubt about Russia's ability to keep up that production in the long term. If Russia's arms industry eventually declines, Chinese weapons could fill the gap. This is especially true after a second recent development: border clashes between India and Pakistan. China is a major supporter of Pakistan, and a large portion of the Pakistani military is imported from China. Before these clashes, there were doubts about the effectiveness of Chinese weapons, particularly as they had not really been tested in an actual war, especially not against American or European weapons. But after Pakistan successfully defended itself against India, which mostly uses American and European weapons, the value of Chinese weapons rose. For Middle Eastern countries, this means China is no longer just a weaker alternative to the United States, but a competitor of the same quality. The third factor is the decline in America's reputation, particularly since the war in Gaza and the start of President Trump's second term. Will Trump push for forced displacement in Gaza? Is he serious about his claims on the Suez Canal? And will he really cut all foreign aid to all countries in the world? This does not necessarily mean that Middle Eastern countries will abandon the United States, but it could mean that they will balance their relations between both powers, just in case one side does something that threatens the national interests of the other side. That being said, however, China's military presence is still at the moment not at the same level as that of the United States or Russia, and next week we'll explore Russia's policy towards the region, just as we covered the United States policy last week and China's policy today. Thank you for watching.